The Unofficial History of Sacha Timony. Part 3. Hitching a Lift. Sacha looked around furtively as the approaching footsteps grew louder. Her heart raced and her mind focused. There was no way she could get off the cart in time. She would have to hide, at least for now. She eyed the boxes, crates, and casks quickly. Almost all of them seemed to be filled with oozy, rich-smelling liquids. She was not a strong swimmer, and even if she was, the thought of trying to tread water in wine did not fill her with confidence. And if she were to wade on top, or even on the side of one, she would be spotted for sure. The light on the cart seemed to shift as the shadow of the carter appeared in front of her. She had to do something and fast. At last, she saw an opportunity. A box of bottles nearby was covered over with a thick brown canvas. She could hide in there, under the fabric, and with any luck, slip out later when no one was looking. Her muscles ached from her night unexpectedly spent sleeping on the boards of the cart, but even still she felt a rush of excitement as she ran and jumped. This was an adventure, she laughed to herself as she thought about telling the story later. The canvas was tied down on hooks on the side of the crate. She didn't have time to work the thick strings, though. She would have to be out of sight of the carter immediately. Slipping her pack down to her side, she clambered under the fabric and toppled in. The wind was knocked out of her as she fell on her back with her pack landing hard on her chest, but she smiled and stifled a laugh. Almost straight away, the world began to move. The crate was lifted up, and Sacha could feel the expanse of air beneath it and the long drop to the ground below. Steadying herself as best as she could, she looked around for any crack in the wood or tear in the fabric that she might spy through. The best she could do was to peer through the narrow gaps of the wooden boards beneath her feet. She could make out the heavily cobbled street below and the enormous leather-booted feet of the carter. More than once, she stumbled and even fell down as the carter shifted and reshifted the crate as he carried it. The bottles around her clinked and burbled as they were jostled about in their spacers. There was no secure place to hold, though, so she tumbled and rolled with each tilt. And then, all of a sudden, the world went black. The light of the sun, which up to then had been shining through thin openings in the wood, and even the tight weave of the threads above her, seemed to disappear. Were they there already? One final thud threw Sacha down again. She cursed the clumsiness of the carter and scampered through the maze of bottles, feeling her way to the edge of the crate. She could hear the footsteps of the carter again, this time growing fainter and farther away as they seemed to echo and reverberate coldly around a large space. This didn't feel right. She waited as long as she could, breathing as quietly as possible in case she was not alone. Silence. In time, when nothing more seemed to happen, she reached her hands up and grabbed onto the side of the crate. It was harder from this side, pulling herself up and out, and she was thankful that none of her own kind were there to witness it. She dropped like a lead weight, under the canvas and out onto the table? Her eyes were adjusting to the darkness now. She was in a cold stone room and standing on a high dark oak table. A thin streak of light cut into the room through a crack between a heavy timber door and its stone frame. In the half-light, she could make out shelves and cupboards everywhere. There were no windows in there. It was clearly a storeroom of some sort. The high ceiling was flat with no rafters. There was no other door out of the room, and her heart sank as she heard voices just outside. The carter was arguing over price again, it seemed. That wasn't the problem, though. She heard, too, a heavy metallic clunking sound as the key turned into a lock. The voices grew even fainter as the big people walked away. She was trapped. What would she do? What could she do? She peered around again for any way out. Perhaps there was a crack or opening down on the... She gulped. Deeper shadows among the darkness of the floor began to move. Small pinpricks of light reflected up, as keen eyes looked up at her as she made out the unmistakable squeaking and scratching of rats. That was it. She would definitely have to do something now. But what? Should she try and fight them? She had her needle. She had trained with it too. Goodness, she had even taken on a cat just the night before. Surely she could fight a rat. But then, how many of them were there? She could always try to get away from them. The shelves went high. She could climb up and wait it out until someone opened the door again. Though how long might that take? And what other creatures could be hiding in here with her too? The only other thing would be to try and get past the rats. They must have some way in and out of their own. Maybe there was a hole she could climb through. She would have to be quick on her feet though. It wouldn't be an easy escape. She slung her pack on her back and gripped the hilt of her needle tight. Far below, the shadows continued to move, and she heard the sound of clawed feet climbing up the table leg. It was time for action.
This story is written by Clephane. For this and more, as well to vote on where Sacha should go next, consider backing Clephane on Patreon for as little as £1 a month.